special to me. I've known her for a while now. She's got an amazing life. She was actually born in Cuba, but her family immigrated to the United States when she was just 3 years old. And she landed in Gainesville, Florida. And she grew up to be a woman of many talents. She was the honor student, captain of her tennis team, captain of varsity cheerleading, and she was also homecoming queen. Elena then went on to attend the University of Florida at 17. The summer before her freshman year, she studied the Bible and made the decision to make Jesus Lord of her life, and she was baptized in 1973. Shortly after that, she married Kip McKean, 1976, the love of her life. And they both received their bachelor's degrees. Not long after this, they answered the call to then go into the full-time ministry. And Elena has served alongside her husband Kip in planting and leading some of the fastest-growing churches in the world, in places such as Boston, Los Angeles in the U.S., Cairo, Egypt, Manila, Philippines, Moscow, Russia. And she's been happily married to, actually, Dr. Kip McKean for 39 years, and in June they're going to celebrate their 40th wedding anniversary. God has blessed this amazing couple with 3 grown children who all lead very successful lives. They have 3 beautiful granddaughters as well. And what I love about Elena is she's a woman of great learning. She's distinguished herself as the first woman to receive both a master's degree and a doctorate degree in Christian ministry from the International College of Christian Ministries based in LA. Her doctorate dissertation about the women in Jesus' ministry is entitled Elevate, and it's about Jesus' revolution for the women's ministry. It's actually going to be published and available in the fall. And she currently serves as the Vice Chancellor of Women for ICCM. Elena and her husband Kip presently serve as the World Missions Evangelist and Women's Ministry Leader for the International Christian Churches. She's a greatly sought-after speaker, and we are so privileged and honored to hear from her today. I am personally so grateful for her. Without her and her husband, Dr. Kip's faith, I would not be here to this day. Please, please give your full attention to Elena. I give you Elena McKean.
Saludos cariñosos de Los Angeles, warm greetings from LA. I'm so excited. I love Women's Days. These are probably some of the most special times and memories that I have as a woman in God's kingdom. And it's so great to be here in San Francisco. I love your city. It has to be one of the most beautiful cities in the whole world. It's gorgeous, and we've been to a lot of cities. But I really especially am happy to be with our beautiful daughter, Tiffany. She's our daughter-in-law, but is more like a daughter. She's awesome. And Tiffany and our son Eric live here in San Francisco, so I'm super grateful you invited me to come and be here for your Women's Day so I could celebrate this time with her and with you all. And then I do love Sarah. Thank you for your introduction. I've known Sarah for 12 years. She was a college student in Portland, Oregon, and it's so awesome to see how God has just raised her up. She's a beautiful, incredible women's ministry leader, and she's married to an incredible man, Jason, and they're doing such a great job with the church here. And of course, you know them, you've got them here, but those of you who don't get to know them, and it's awesome to see her raising her children as well, and how much she loves being a mom. And then, of course, Cindy Oakes, who gave one of the testimony, has been a great friend of mine for almost 20 years. It's hard to believe. And I really, really admire all the women who gave their testimonies. It takes a lot of courage to open up about a lot of the pain that these women have been through. And I did love the video. It was really a modern fairy tale, a spiritual fairy tale that I think is good for us to think about the battle we're in spiritually. Because our lives get so busy with the physical things and emotional stuff that we forget the most important, and that's the spiritual. And that's what I want to talk about today. Once upon a time. You know, so many of us think about fairy tales when we hear that. And of course, there's another popular saying that was already used today by Camille in a great way, and they lived happily ever after. right? That's what we hear. We've heard that since we were a little girl. It's been ingrained in us. Once upon a time, and you're going to find that Prince Charming. You're going to have a fantastic life, and you'll live happily ever after. But that's not quite the reality. And I want to talk about that some today, too. I hear there's a popular TV show called Once Upon a Time, and I'm sorry I haven't watched it yet, but I do love fairy tales. And, you know, I am an abuela. So my favorite fairy tale, it's a Disney animated fairy tale, of course, is Frozen. And, you know, it's interesting because that movie, Disney has grabbed this concept of a fairy tale. And that movie is actually taken from a really old fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen, and it's The Snow Queen. I don't even know if you've ever heard of that one. But I do think fairy tales are something that a lot of us grew up with, but it's not the reality of life. And especially this last 6 months, there's been horrible things going on in our world. I was just sitting at a table with a young woman who's from Belgium. I mean, just earlier this week, Tuesday, we had the horrific suicide terrorist attacks where so many people were killed and wounded and out of just sheer hate and supposedly in the name of God. I was over, just Paris. I love Paris. That's probably my second favorite city in the whole world. To hear what happened there, all the lives that were taken because of the suicide attacks. And then even in our own backyard, San Bernardino, California, there were suicide attacks there. It was the weirdest, craziest thing. And then just last night, Friday, in Iraq, there was a suicide bombing at a soccer ceremony where people were celebrating as families soccer, and this guy just comes in and decides to end it. They killed 25 people, injured 90. Okay, well that's around the world. Let's look at some of the U.S. stats. That I've been, a lot of what I do is helping women and trying to figure out what's going on in our world with women, and I wanted to share these with you because some of the women shared some of the stuff personally from their life today, but it just grabs your heart when you hear what's going on in our world towards women. 1 in 5 girls is a victim of child sexual abuse. 1 in 5. And the number's even worse in other parts of the world. 3 out of 4 adolescents who have been sexually assaulted were victimized by someone that they knew well. So they were robbed of their innocence by someone they trusted. Depression. 1.4 million girls between the ages of 12 and 17 have experienced a depressive episode in this last year alone. 1 in 5 girls from age 10 to 18 years of age, 1 in 5 girls are cutting themselves with razor blades or burning themselves with matches. This is an ever-growing phenomenon. Last year, just under 9,000 women committed suicide. 9,000 in the U.S. Drugs and alcohol abuse. In 2015, 9 million women used illegal drugs. 69% of the women in substance abuse treatment centers have been sexually abused as children. Older women are more likely to self-medicate with alcohol or prescription drugs to deal with the loss of a spouse, financial problems, or loneliness. Divorce. The divorce rate in America for first marriages is 41%. The divorce rate in America for second marriages is 60%. The divorce rate in America for third marriages is 73%. The divorce rate in California is 75%. Single parents. There are 12 million single parent families. More than 80% of them are headed by single moms, and I know a lot of you in this audience are in that role, and it's a challenging role. You know, our lives are no fairy tales. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of abuse, a lot of things that we've been through, and several of the women shared already today that just breaks your heart. But I want to answer from the Bible the hope that we have through God. And I love our theme scripture, and I just want to read it quickly to you in the Message Bible. I love the Message translation. A lot of you that know me, it's a street English Bible. And I just think it's good to get down to that level sometimes where it just gets to your heart. And in 1 John chapter 4, I had the page marked right here, verse 9 and 10, it says, "This is how God showed his love for us. God had sent his only Son into the world so we might live through him. This is the kind of love we're talking about. Not that we once upon a time loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as a sacrifice to clear away all of our sins and the damage these sins have done to our relationship with God and, of course, our relationship with each other." And, just to understand the amazing love that God has for us, if you can just get that today and get it every day of your life, it will change you. And it will change how you view yourself, how you view the whole world, how you view other people. And I want to talk about that some today because, I think a lot of times in the religious world, understanding the incredible love of God is not understood by women especially. And I got to share, and I feel so blessed. I've been able to do my dissertation in the last few years. I focused a lot on the book of Luke, and that's where the whole concept of Jesus' ministry, that he elevated women. And if you read the Gospel of Luke, you will see so many women that Jesus helped and touched. And I'm only going to touch on a few today, because otherwise we'd be here for a whole month. And you can read the book later and study it out. But, really, Jesus did elevate women. And that's what I want to talk about. It's an amazing concept that the religious world has missed. And if you would turn with me now in the NIV Bible, that's probably the best translation there is, supposedly these days. That's what they say. In Luke chapter 7. And I'm going to read a little bit here from Luke. I won't read a whole lot because hopefully you'll be inspired to read more on your own or with another woman that brought you today. But if you could turn, if you have a Bible, to Luke chapter 7, verse 11 through 17. Again, I'm so happy to be here, and it's so wonderful to see moms and daughters and grandmas and sisters and neighbors and friends together as women, really thinking about spiritual truths that are so important in our lives. The most important. In Luke chapter 7, verse 11, soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Then he went up and touched the bier or the plank they were carrying this young man on, and the bearer stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They were all filled with awe and praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. "God has come to help his people." And if we could just do a video of this scene, I would love that. Maybe Elliot, you can do it sometime. Here Jesus is coming with a crowd into the city of Nain with his disciples, and then another crowd is coming out from the city. Just envision this. And there's a dead young man on a plank, and there's a widow, the mom of this son, her only son, walking alongside, of course, brokenhearted. And all the wailing, everybody, these large crowds wailing behind her. And here there's two crowds. There's Jesus' crowd, because people were intrigued by his teachings, his miracles. And then there's the funeral procession, the mourning crowd. Jesus doesn't even pay attention to any of those crowds. He just, what does it say here? He's concerned about the woman. His heart goes out to her. He sees her pain. He sees her loneliness. He sees what empty future she must feel that she has. And he says, don't cry. I understand. And then, back in that day, it was so hot that when people died, they'd right away have their funeral procession that day. So it was very raw. Her pain was intense and raw. And here Jesus comes and says to the guys carrying the plank, he touches it and he says, young man, I say to you, get up. And of course, the dead man sits up and he begins to talk. Wouldn't you have loved to have been there and wondered what in the world he said? And then the mom, what in the world she must have said. I would love to see, just envision what joy, incredible joy, and gratitude. And in fact, it says the people were filled with awe and praised God, and they really recognized that God was among them and was there to help his people. And who were his people in this situation? A mom, a mother, a widow, a woman. And I want to share about that because I think sometimes we think we're second rate in the religious world. I know I did. As Sarah shared, I was born in Cuba, and I left at a very early age. Thank goodness my dad had gone to high school with Castro, so he knew the communist revolution wasn't going to be a very pleasant experience. My dad was a very spiritual man. He believed in religious freedom, and he wanted us to have the American dream to come to America. So they actually left everything and came on a boat to, of all places, Gainesville, Florida, because that's where you could find work. But I'm really grateful, but it was a lonely time for me as a teenager. Even though I accomplished a lot of outward successful things, I was really lonely inside. And I know a lot of you can probably relate. My best friend growing up was my older sister Carmen. We're only 2 years apart. We shared our room. We did everything together. We played tennis together. That's why I think I was very competitive, because of her. I had someone to play with all the time. And we lived right across the street. Literally, our home was right across the street from the tennis courts of the University of Florida. So we had all these opportunities for junior clinics and neighborhood gangs that played tennis. It was really fun, a fun thing. And I was very competitive. That was a really interesting time. It was the late 60s and 70s. There was anti-Vietnam riots near our home. The women's lib movement was very strong, and I was really into it. My parents weren't too fired up about that. But I did grow up. My family was very strict, and it was a Cuban home. We had to speak Spanish at home, which I appreciate now. I didn't at the time. But it was a confusing time for me as a teenager. I remember when my older sister went off to college, I just felt like I had no one I could talk to, no one I trusted. Because of everything with our family, I just did not trust anyone outside the family. And I remember, too, I was very competitive. I loved to beat guys on the tennis court. It was my passion. I would get them out there and just show them that I could beat them, that I was better than them. And in school, the same thing. I was very competitive. I wanted to have the best grades and do the best. And of course, it was funny because I started dating my so-called new best friend in my senior year. He was student body president. I was student body treasurer. He was homecoming king. I was homecoming queen. And, I thought we had this great thing going. But, our relationship started to get impure. It was just crazy. I felt like, this is a mess. My life is a mess. I was deceitful with my parents. I was going to parties where there was a lot of drugs and alcohol, even though I didn't participate in a lot of that stuff because I was scared I could not spend the night out of the house. That's a very Latin tradition. I had to come home every night, sleep at home, which I'm grateful for now because it probably saved me from a lot of terrible, crazy things that I was curious about. And the other thing that my parents were really strict about was a curfew. I had to tell them where I was going and what I was doing and who I was with. But I lied to them a lot. I was so bitter and deceitful. My heart was getting so hard towards them. And I think that was part of why I was so lonely, because I was living a crazy life inside. And I remember coming home from a tennis practice. I was driving home by myself one day, and I was just tired. So tired of playing, as Camille talked about, trying to be perfect, trying to live up to being a certain person that you're really not. And I remember just crying out to God. I said, God, please help me change. Please help me, or just take my life. Take it. I was tired. I didn't actually do anything, but I prayed a negative prayer for help. And yet God answered that prayer. And I'm really, really grateful. My older sister Carmen got involved in a campus ministry that was there at the University of Florida and started sharing the Bible with me. She came home for the summer and we shared the room again, and we had some really deep, heartfelt conversations. I wasn't a real open person because I really liked controlling my life. Even though it was a miserable life, I wanted to be in control. I didn't want Jesus to be Lord of my life. I didn't want to follow the Bible. I even had doubts about the Bible because I didn't really know it, but I'd heard about it in school that it had a lot of contradictions and, it was written 2,000 years ago. How can you believe something like that? And I remember Carmen just being patient and loving and reading the gospel with me, reading about Jesus with me. And I don't know where you all are at, but you need to read the Bible for yourself. And you need to read it in a language that you can relate to and understand. And see how much God loves you. And I'll never forget, it took me 3 months of studying the Bible and going to church, a different church. I was raised in a very traditional church where the women really weren't involved in much at all of the church. And I just didn't feel like it really was helping me. But I remember going to this church where the Bible was really being taught in a practical way with my sister. I remember the college devotionals, and it inspired me so much. I felt the spiritual energy. I felt there was hope. But like I said, my pride took me 3 months. And I'll never forget, though, the day I got baptized. It was in 1973, August 8th. I was 17 years old. And I share that because I'm so grateful. I don't know where my life would have ended up if I had not become a Christian at that age. Because I was so messed up in my head and in my heart. And I apologized, of course, to my parents. I told them a lot of the garbage I had gotten into in my heart and the deceit. And it definitely healed my relationship with them. But the best thing was how much I felt healed with God. My heart was so free, so full of peace, so much joy that I had never experienced ever in my life. And I hope you'll consider studying out what it really means to be baptized in the way the Bible teaches. It's a powerful miracle. And they kind of showed it some in the video up there. But I was baptized. It's been 43 years, and I still remember that day. And I wrote a letter to God that night, and I treasured that time in my life where God took me to be his daughter. And the second point I want to talk about, Jesus elevates the lonely woman, like that woman we read in Luke 7, but he also elevates discipleship among women, and that's in Luke 8. And that was actually the premise for my dissertation was in Luke chapter 8, and I have to read it from the Message Bible, because it really, when I read this, I was like, wow. And that's what the Bible should be for you when you read it. Wow, God's speaking to you. There's some incredible things in here. And it hits you differently at different times in your life. In Luke chapter 8, verse 1, Jesus continued according to plan. Traveled to town after town, village after village, preaching God's kingdom, spreading the message. The 12 were with him. There were also some women in their company who had been healed of various evil afflictions and illnesses. Mary, the one called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out. Joanna, the wife of Chusa, Herod's manager, and Susanna, along with many others who used their considerable means, these are well-to-do women, to provide for the company. And it hit me. These women were traveling with Jesus. They were part of his discipleship ministry. And yet, for so long, I read that I didn't really get it. I knew that women were important in the church. I sensed it. But because of the culture, even back then, women were not allowed to be educated in the Jewish way like the men were. Jesus was a rabbi, and his students were all supposed to be men. That was the culture. But he had women in his company. He was teaching women spiritual truths and working through them, I believe, raising up these women in particular, these 3, to help the other women. to get stronger spiritually. But it's amazing that here Jesus, a Jewish teacher, allowed women to come and sit at his feet. And there's another in Luke 10, I don't have time to read it, but there's these two sisters, Mary and Martha. And remember, Mary was complimented by Jesus for sitting at his feet, wanting to learn spiritual things. Whereas Martha was busy and distracted and worried and stressed out about life, which is how we can get. But Jesus would have women sit at his feet. He wanted them to learn. He wanted them to be close to him. He wanted them to be close to God. He wanted to change the whole world, and women are a large part of the world. But the other thing I love about this, and again, as part of my dissertation, he had the inner three women, just as he had the inner three men, Peter, James, and John. Here we see the inner three, Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and Susanna. And it's just amazing. I love Mary Magdalene especially, because she's mentioned many times in the scriptures, and almost every time her name is mentioned first. And it's because I think she was really close to Jesus and one of the key women in his ministry. In fact, she was the first person, male or female, to see the resurrected Christ. And that's in John 20, verse 11 through 18. And when she saw Jesus, she didn't even recognize him at first because she had gone to the tomb. She was at the foot of the cross with Jesus' mother Mary. She was right there. A lot of the disciples, the apostles, scattered because they were all scared. But there were a few women that were right there at the cross, and Mary Magdalene was one of those women. And she was so distraught, so upset, even watched where they took Jesus to bury him, and then when it was time to prepare his body, she went to do that. And of course, his body wasn't there. He was gone. And she was all upset, so she didn't recognize Jesus when he first was coming to her. And then he speaks to her, and then she recognizes him. And she cries, Rabboni, which means my great teacher. She was so fired up and happy and grabbed him. Again, you have to read that in John 20. She was so happy that he was alive. He was resurrected, to see that miracle. And it just shows, again, it just touched my heart. He values women. That the first person to see his resurrection was a woman. And a very special woman at that. Someone that he was close to, that he loved and had trained spiritually. There's a scripture that I want to share with you that, again, read it later because of time. It's Titus 2, verse 2 through 4. Some of you here may know it. It's one of my favorite passages. It talks about how the older women need to train the younger women in life, in spiritual things. And the whole verse, you got to read the whole verse. It's great. The verse is. And I have to share again from my life because I think it helps people. It's not a real wonderful thing, but it helps people to understand that we all have our challenges. I'm really blessed. I dated Kip in college. We had a wonderful dating relationship. He was great. He took care of me spiritually. We had fun. I did like to play ping pong and tennis with him, but I usually let him win. We had a wonderful honeymoon. I did beat him in tennis on our honeymoon. And that was not intentional. I was just playing really out of my mind. We were having a great time. And, anyway, we had to work through that a little bit. But we got married, and I was sharing with someone earlier, you know, I grew up in Florida. I'm from a Cuban home where my mom was very strong, and, you know, my dad was wonderful, but he had to work a lot. He was gone a lot. My mom ran the house, and there were 5 kids, so she was a tough, strong lady, and I'm grateful. And Kip was raised in a very American family where his dad was an admiral and a doctor in the Navy. So you know who ran the household in his family. Well, when we got married, I just didn't know how to be a Christian, godly wife. I kind of went back to what I knew, which is what I saw growing up. And my mom was in charge. And there were a lot of things I was feeling. I didn't know how to communicate. I was lonely. I was doing my internship in occupational therapy in the dead cold of Illinois. I grew up in Florida. I had to drive in the snow and the ice. I was freaking out and had a few accidents, but people were so nice there. Everybody has accidents because of the snow and the ice. But I was really lonely, and here Kip was in the campus ministry. He was the campus minister for the church, and I was supposed to help him with the women, and I was just so miserable, though. I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't see the older women in the church. At that time, we didn't have mentoring and discipling like we do in the church now. And it was terrible, but it was good. God taught me that all of us need mentoring, discipling in our lives. And I called the woman that I was close to in Florida, the minister's wife there that I trusted, and I said, you know what, I'm doing terrible. I'm ready to bag this marriage. I need to talk to you. I need to talk to someone. And finally, they came up. Kip organized a conference. They came up and they talked, especially she did with Kip and I. It helped me so much to get rid of the bitterness, that I was just not communicating well, and I needed discipling. I needed older women to talk to help me, and I needed to talk to Kip too, because I just stuffed everything, and it was terrible. And I'm sorry, Kip, he's here. It was a rough time, but God healed us and helped us, and we learned so much. And it's important that we have strong women's ministries in our churches, and that we have women in our lives, that we work as a team. We're not in competition with the men, but we work as a team. And then it brings glory to God. But this, as was shared earlier by Sarah, this team effort, God allowed us to found the Christian College in 2012 in LA, and it's actually accredited by the state of California. So we can give degrees, ministry degrees, and bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and doctorates. And it really helps people to get solid and deeper in their Bible. But the most amazing thing to me is that we have equal number of men and women in the program. And it's been going strong for the last several years. And of course, I love it. I see how God is elevating women in the ministry to work together with the men and to build healthy, strong, vibrant churches all around the world. And we actually have ICCMs in other parts of the world now. It's awesome. But let me get back to my third point. Jesus elevates the sick and dying women, and that's in Luke 8. It's in verse 40, and we'll read it in the NIV. And this is, again, another intense time where we see Jesus helping women. Luke chapter 8, verse 40 through 48. Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house, because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind Jesus and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." And this is one of my favorite passages, because here Jesus is swarmed people all around him. This very powerful man, Jairus, comes, who's hurting. He falls at his feet. Says, "I need you to come to my home. My only precious daughter, who's 12, is dying." So Jesus goes with him. He wants to help. But the crowds are crushing him, and all of a sudden, this woman touches the hem of his garment. And he knows it. But he didn't know exactly what the situation was. He just knew that power had gone out from him, and he wanted to know who this person was. And I want you to just imagine again being here. Imagine you being this woman, that you had your period for 12 straight years. How weak you would feel. How ashamed you would feel. And in that culture, when you had your period, you were unclean. You were to be isolated and separated from society. So for 12 years, this woman was isolated and alone and weak. She's probably anemic. And she went to all kinds of doctors. In another one of the Gospels, it said she spent all the money she had on doctors, and they still couldn't help her. And I'm not down on doctors. I'm just saying they couldn't help her. And who could help her? Jesus. And she had faith that he could help her. And that's why she went and just said, if I just touch the hem of his garment. And I love the fact that he wanted to engage with her and talk to her. And then she comes and, she's so grateful that she was healed, even though she was scared. She hadn't been around public people for 12 years. And here she took the courage to do that and got healed. And Jesus says to her in verse 48, daughter, your faith has healed you. Again, that personal daughter. He cared about her. He valued her. And, this woman was probably older in life, so to speak. I can relate to this woman. It's amazing what God has done in my life. In April of 2014, I was feeling really weak, dizzy a lot, losing weight. And I thought it was just because we were traveling. Our daughter had just had her first grandbaby, and I was with her, and that was awesome. The miracle of seeing new birth and being with our daughter at that time was so special, but you don't get much sleep for like 2 weeks. And I remember coming home, and Kip said, well, you need to probably go get a checkup. And I have a woman doctor that I've had for years, and I had missed my checkup the last year, and I was not being really good. I try to go faithfully. I do believe it's good to check, especially the female stuff. But anyway, I went to her, and I told her how I was feeling. She started doing all these blood tests on me, and she said, Elena, 2 years ago, your calcium in your blood was high. And I was concerned, and I called you, but you didn't make an appointment. And I said, I did call, and I asked your nurse if it was life-threatening, and she said no. And I said, yeah, oh, good, because I'm busy. And well, this wasn't a very good thing, because when they did more blood tests, my calcium was even higher, and they found cancer markers in my blood. And she right away sent me to a cancer doctor, and they did more tests. I had bone tests, all kinds of tests, urine tests, TB tests. They thought maybe I might have tuberculosis. They didn't know. It was a scary time. And I remember the cancer doctor said, yeah, you have bone cancer. And you have a cancer that we can treat with chemo for, maybe people live 4 to 5 years, but it comes back. And and Kip was with me. It's very shocking to hear news like that, because I was like, okay, I knew something wasn't right, but I wasn't expecting that. And I know when we got out of the appointment, we both prayed, and I started researching a lot, so did Kip, and we decided we would start juicing. And juicing is where you fast and you drink a lot of the hardcore green stuff. And I won't go into it all, but I gave up a lot of stuff, unhealthy things, and again, I prayed a lot, and one of my prayers, Kip and I prayed together a lot, but one of my prayers one night, crying out, begging God, I said, God, please give me 20 more years. 20 more years to see this world evangelized for you and to help my family. Because I wanted to help our granddaughters to understand God's love. I wanted to be a part of life. I felt like I had so much that I was learning and wanted to help in the world. Well, in 2 months, I started. It's a long story. I could share more things, but again, there's time limitations. In 2 months, the cancer was totally gone. Wow. It was a miracle. Even the cancer doctor couldn't believe it. He said, I've never seen anything like this. And, I know it's God. God took it. And he answered my prayers, but I also believe I had to learn some things about my body. And our immune systems are pretty resilient and powerful. God made them that way. So you do need to listen to your body. And I'm not going to lecture you up here about that. But I do believe God has a purpose for my life. And I'm so grateful. I wasn't afraid to die. And I always tell people that, because I think heaven's going to be incredible. But I just didn't feel like it was my time yet. There's too much to do. This world is so hurting, and I know I can help make a difference. Well, Jesus does elevate the sick and dying older women. I was about 59 when all that happened. And then in Luke chapter 8, verse 49, for all you young ones out there, while Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, he said. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, don't be afraid. Just believe, and she will be healed. When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. Stop wailing, Jesus said. She's not dead, but asleep. They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, my child, get up. Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. The Bible is so real. There's things, we need to eat. And especially the girl had been sick for a while. She probably hadn't eaten. But the miracle of God raising this young woman, elevating her to life. And, no matter if you're old or young, Jesus wants to elevate your life. And he has a purpose for your life. He has a plan for your life. And, I think sometimes we think when we're young, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have much to offer. Yes, you do. And I actually think it's the best thing, the best decision you can make to become a disciple at a young age, to become a true Christian, because it guides you in every other decision of your life. It prevents you from getting into all kinds of horrific situations. But I love the way he said, my child, get up. Again, that personable connection that Jesus had with that young woman. I don't know how you feel about Jesus, and if you've really studied the Bible much yourself, but we've all begun our lives with once upon a time. And we all want happily ever after, right? Well, as a young woman, I wanted to become a medical doctor. That was one of my big dreams, to help heal people. And I believe God gave me a happily ever after in his kingdom. He changed my dream. I went into the ministry, the full-time ministry. After serving, I did work as an occupational therapist for a couple years, but I wanted to serve alongside my husband and help with the women. It was something that I knew I had a lot to learn, but I love being in the full-time ministry. And last year, I turned 60. And I'm very grateful. And incredibly, I received my doctorate in ministry last year, which was a dream. Because I do believe God will heal us when we're lonely. God will give us the discipleship we need as women. And God will also raise you from being whatever you're sick with. Maybe it's not physical things. Maybe it's emotional stuff. Maybe it's mental stuff. And we're all dying spiritually without God. So please consider, and thank you so much, and may God bless you with the happily ever after.